Welcome everyone to the beginning of a new trend. I'm gonna do. Hope everyone's having a good new year. We're gonna kick things off with a bit of a series that I'm about to do. We'll do silly melee tier lists and all that, where we discuss how the character's appropriate mains associate with certain situations and all that. Today we're going to do um, basically like a stubbornness scale. Um, we're gonna rank character mains based on my personal experience with how receptive they are at taking advice. Say they lose a set, they might be aware of what might have cost them the game, the set or not, um, and you give them advice. Um, we're gonna go over how likely or unlikely they are to take your advice. We're gonna just sweep through this. Fox mains, let's begin with Fox. They're actually surprisingly, in my experience, quite receptive due to how many options Fox players have with their character. They'll more than often like give you some credit if you have, as long as you have an iota of sense of what you're talking about. In my experience, most Fox mains don't really tend to be very stubborn. They tend to be pretty open-minded to like, yeah, um, maybe I should have done this here, I should have done that there. Their character has a lot of options, so that tends to be the case. Falcos are a little bit different. They're like, meh, kind of like a mixed bag. They'll be like, whatever, man, whatever. But in the back of their heads, they'll probably be like, he's right, I just don't want to give him any credit. You know, they kind of have a little bit more like an edgelord version of Fox, where Falcos could retain advice pretty well, but they're just a little more, as opposed in comparison with Foxes, they are a little more like grounded in what they're doing in their heads. Marth, where would I put Marth? Marth is tricky. Um, I think Marths are a lot like Fox. They have a lot of options, and they'll probably give you credit where it's due as long as you have a lick of sense in what you're saying. I think Marth mains will be open to a lot of things. Um, yeah. Um, yeah. Very similar to Fox. Their character has a lot of options. Sheiks. Sheiks. Sheiks are kind of nerdy. They're kind of textbook. I feel like they're somewhat. It's just they're nerdy and they're very textbook, and they really think that like they've labbed things, but I think they become like a mixed bag because you get a like kind of like a variance of like sheiks who study a lot of frame data, and then you have sheiks who are a little more receptive, who can probably it's a little bit of a mix. Their character doesn't have as many options as Marth and Fox, so they kind of have to be more nerdy about the matchups. So like, if you tell a sheik what um what like any advice, you kind of have to do your homework a bit. Otherwise, the sheik will probably not give you credit. Probably not. I'm gonna leave it at that. Falcons really want to kind of do their own thing because Falcons have like a set of religious acts that they must abide by, right? If a Falcon deems anything as lame, most Falcons will you know, we all know by now Falcons frown on the idea of up tilting one another. Um, they have their own culture, so if you want to come at a Falcon with some sort of advice, um, you have to consider the Falcon culture. Otherwise, they're gonna really kind of give you some pushback. But they're not the most stubborn either. it will give you some leeway, but just you have to take into account. Uh, Falcons want to play the game that they want to play, so they're not going to they're not going to completely turn their gameplay upside down over some advice. They're not going to do that at all. Like 10 times out of 10, I'm telling you right now. Puffs. Giving Puff advice would... I don't want to say stubborn. I don't think Puffs are like... Well, actually, they kind of are. Yeah. Puffs are kind of stuck in their ways a little bit. If you try to tell them to experiment with more ground movement, as I remember I would tell Puffs, like just try to experiment more on the ground, like don't be in the air so damn much, and then they'll be like, what are you talking about? Like fair and fair, like I'm supposed to be in the air, and it's like, I don't know, man, you'll be surprised. They're almost here, but they will, if you know enough about what you're saying, they'll give you credit. They're almost here. They're almost in this tier. Yeah. Puffs definitely wanna oftentimes be discount HBox just to realize they're not HBox. So you can never really be HBox because you're not HBox. So it's only the ones like CPU Zero, Solo Battle, those really well-known like other Puffs that go for other things that end up really pushing the character, because you have to accept like Puff is actually a very creative character. It has a lot more options than people give credit for. So just kind of like a shtick, you know, that Puffs need to get over. Now Peach. Peaches are pretty stubborn. Peaches are pretty stubborn. I think Peaches go here. Yeah. Many times if you try to tell Peach, like Peach mains, oof, man, you'll be hard pressed to find one that's like open-minded to like advice. They're quite stubborn. They're one of the few mains that actually, because I'm pretty stubborn. I'm a pretty damn stubborn person, but there are some people who really impress me with their stubbornness to the point where I'm like, wow, man, I'm impressed. You're more stubborn than me. Oh man. Yeah. Like if you put me next to certain people, you'll be like, yeah, Yarto's a stubborn mother effer, but he's a lot more forgiving than certain people. Yeah. Leave it at that. Yoshi, it comes with the character. I think it's an inherent thing that Yoshis are pretty damn stubborn if you try to tell them anything. Like, because, you know, to give Yoshi's advice, like, Yoshi is such a weird, different character from the rest of the cast that, like, there's no way you're not a Yoshi main and you're able to give Yoshi any advice, a Yoshi player any kind of advice. They're gonna be like, I have my reasons for doing everything. The matchup is the way that it is because you just don't understand. Bug off. You know, that's how it is. Pikachu's. They kind of want to do things their way. They're in this, I would put them in this category. They kind of sort of want to do things their way. But they're in that category where, like, if you give a Pikachu really solid advice, even though you might not know much about the character is quite unique. The Pikachu will take your advice eventually. It might take them a bit, but they'll take your advice eventually if you're right. And they'll be like, yeah, you know, yeah. How are Samuses with taking advice? Where would I put Samus? Where would I put Samus? Where would I put Samus? I think Samuses also fall in this category where they mostly really want to do things their way. But if you're sound enough in your advice, they will give you credit. But Samuses really are a lot like, They really want to play the game their way. They're not going to be receptive to most people's pieces of advice, which is within reason. Samus does have to play by her own kind of set of rules. Very quite a unique character in the cast. Yeah. Now let's go over the Mario Bros. Mario specifically is super stubborn. I think we all know this. If you try to tell my experience, man, like if you ever see like a Mario main molding, you just gotta let it happen, dog. You just gotta let it happen. Like there's no telling that Mario anything because he's gonna tell you to go off yourself. There's nothing. God forbid you tell him to go dock. You're 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 probably catching hands. You're probably catching hands. Luigi's, however, middle of the pack. There might be like, I don't like this advice that you're giving me. I might have to change the way that I play and approach the game, but whatever. Um, they're more receptive. Luigi mains almost kind of want to be like Falcons and Samuses in that they want to play the game their way, but they do realize that due to just Luigi being pretty limited as you get better, that they do have to kind of run with whatever advice they're given. So they're a little more receptive because Luigi just doesn't have as many options as Falcon and Samus in the grand scheme of things, as you get better as a player. Our docs, receptive to advice. Docs are kind of in between. They fall in this category where they're pretty nerdy about their character, so you kind of have to know. In my experience, if you want to give Doc mains any advice, you have to prove to them that you know stuff about Doc, that you're not just a general player. Like, if the Doc knows that you only play top tiers, the Doc is gonna give you a lot less credit, because the Doc players are very they really advocate like you gotta know my struggle to like be kind of like able to give me any advice, because if you don't play a mid tier or below, they're just gonna like be like, I don't know if I can take your privileged ass, for any, but if the Doc main knows that you play another like sort of struggle character, then they kind of become more lenient. And if you're like, they kind of can be like one of these two tiers and stuff, they become more receptive depending on who you play. It's a very unique experience that I've had with Docs. Yeah, as long as you show to the Doc player that you kind of know the struggle of playing like a non-top tier, they give you much more credit. ICs, how are ICs with advice? ICs are they're kind of nerdy. They're kind of chic-ish. It's a mixed bag. If you're solid in your advice, they're more open, but they do study deliberate things that they do in every matchup. So do come correct, or they'll just kind of like be like, them's the breaks. They know that their character gets camped out, so like if you tell them stuff that has to do with like defensive play or dealing with defensive play, they'll be like, yeah, like they don't like hearing it, but they know the weaknesses of their character, so they're more receptive of like if you give advice in reference to things that might be used against ICs or as ICs specifically. Yeah. Ganons are much like Falcons. They just want to play the game their way. Their way or the highway, really. Like Ganons will drop the Ganons. Also follow like a sort of culture. I don't think it's as hard as Falcon culture, but Ganons definitely do have a little bit of a culture going on where like if the Ganon can't really express himself the way that he wants in the game, loses a lot of faith, and would just rather quit the game than to take any advice at that point. Yeah, I think DKs are very unique. Um, here's the thing. DKs claim to know nothing about their character. You could have a DK genius, right? Like just an absolute like madman of a DK main who just knows a lot, and they'll claim to know nothing. Like you could legit go to Ringler's stream and tell him some bullshit fact about a matchup, and he'll probably just give you credit and be like, yeah, you probably know more than I do. It's actually really hilarious how many DK mains out there will just like claim to not know anything, and you could tell them the most bullshit thing, and you'll be like, I'm talking right on my ass, and they'll just give you credit because they're like, I just want to do DK things. I don't know anything, man. Me dumb monkey, man. And they're actually a lot smarter. DK mains are typically like quite a bit smarter than they give themselves credit for. I don't know what it is with that. It's a very unique thing. Like DKs really don't give themselves credit like at all in terms of like their own intelligence. They know more than they're aware of. Very crazy. Now we have Game & Watch. Where would we put Game & Watch? Game & Watches. I haven't really. Oh man, I don't know. I haven't really interacted with many Game & Watches, but I'm just gonna try to put an opinion out there. I don't want anybody in this category. Game & Watch. They are kind of nerdy because they kind of have to, because they only have access to a few moves. So I would probably on a wild guess put Game & Watch here, where like they have a few strong options, and they like playing the game in a way that allows them to get to their strong options. Obviously, you play a character because you like things that they do well. But if you tell a Game & Watch about like changing up their playstyle and things that they're already doing, they might not want to hear it, but they're not like super stubborn like these three either. Yeah. Mewtwo, we're definitely like quite stubborn. We are definitely quite stubborn. But we're not super stubborn. If we will admit it. We will admit if we're doing something wrong, but we'll do it in private. We'll probably give you a DM if we're wrong about something, and we'll be like, you were right. You were right. Like, we really want to prove you wrong if you try to give us advice, but we will cave in if you're right. That time will come. Same goes for Lynx as well, and I might as well put Young Lynx. Oh well, Young Lynx. Are Young Lynx more open? I think I'll put them in the same category, where like you really have to know what you're talking about and kind of be specific in your advice. Otherwise, they're kind of not really gonna know. They're kind of not really gonna. They're gonna sort of like assume that you're just talking out your ass, basically, right? Yeah. I think I'll leave it at that. Roys are pretty stubborn. Yeah, they're about this level of like stubbornness. Roys really want to play the game their way. If you give them advice, they would really want to prove you wrong. Damn wrong. Damned if they do, damned if they don't try, you know? But no, you know what? Actually, they're like almost really stubborn. Yeah. But if you are good in what you're saying, and you're giving actual good advice, they will admit it. I feel they're not quite like super stubborn tier. Zelda's Zelda's due to I feel as though Zelda's due to like how much experimentation there is to be done with Zelda. Zeldas are surprisingly kind of open to advice. Uh, if you give them advice, they're pretty receptive to it. Especially, we're talking about Zelda mains who are trying to push their character, like push the character beyond forward air and back air. They're pretty good at taking advice. You know, if you tell them to work on their movement, something like that, they'll be like, yeah, I probably have to work on my wavelengths. I probably have to work on, you know, being better at the ledge. My experience, yeah, I feel Zeldas are pretty good at getting advice, I would say. Bowser's, how are Bowser's with advice? Bowser's also want to kind of do things their way, or the highway type beat. They're those kind of vibes. But if like, again, if you're specific and you show them that you have a lick of sense, that you know Bowser somewhat, they'll give you credit. They'll tend to give you more credit. But Bowser's also really want to play the game their way, and they don't like hearing a lot of things in terms of advice. Kirby's don't. I don't think like Kirby's are also kind of like DK, where like you give them advice and they're just like, yeah, my character is just so bad. Like, you probably have been bored enough to mess with this character and probably know more than this character that I do. Yeah. Giving Kirby's advice, as long as you tell them not to play Puff, you know, better Kirby for the most part. They'll be pretty damn receptive and probably just assume that you know more than they do. Yeah. Nesses. How are Nesses with advice? I feel like Nesses also kind of go here, where you just have to let them know that you know the specifics and interactions and what you're talking about, and then they'll give you more credit. Yeah. Pichus are very stubborn, sacks of shit, and if you tell them to play any differently, they're gonna be like, fuck you, my character literally cannot approach. What do you want me to do? I'm fucking Pichu, dog. My character literally cannot approach. And then you're like, well then pick a character that does approach, if that's such a problem. And they're like, but I want to play Pichu. And then you're like, it's just a complete impasse when you try to give Pichu's advice, because it's just like they're just gonna be like, bro, I'm Pichu, and it's like, okay then, pick another character. So yeah, this is my list. Feel free to argue on over. More of these types of videos will be on the way, and do check out my other channel. I'm also doing things on there, so probably put it in the description or end screen, whatever. Anyway, be seeing you guys next time.